When she walks onto the set of the Steve Harvey Show, the audience expects a story. Maybe one of resilience, perhaps a few lighthearted moments, maybe even something inspirational. Steve, with his trademark warmth and humor, is ready to guide the conversation. But when she takes her seat and glances at the crucifix around Steve's neck, something shifts. The lights feel warmer, the energy softer. This isn't just an interview, because in the next few minutes, Steve Harvey won't be the one delivering the message. He'll be the one trying not to cry, and it all starts with a sentence that catches him completely off guard. Can I tell you something I've never said in public? Oh, and before we take off, tell us where you're reading this from. We love seeing your reactions. The crowd settled. The music faded, and Steve Harvey walked across the stage, cue cards in hand, half grin on his face. But something in his eyes said tonight was different. It wasn't just a show. It was about to be a moment. He introduced her not with hype, but with reverence. She's not just an activist, Steve said. She's not just an author or an advocate. She's a mirror to the soul. A woman who's had to find herself in a world that kept telling her she wasn't allowed to exist. The crowd erupted in respectful applause. She stepped out with quiet confidence, wearing simple jeans and a soft lavender blouse, not trying to dazzle, just trying to be. She smiled softly, then sat beside Steve. The room shifted again. There was no performance, just presence. She spoke gently, her voice a blend of strength and scar tissue. I always get nervous in spaces like this, she admitted with a slight laugh. But something about this moment feels like home. Steve leaned in. You're safe here. They talked at first about her journey, not just as a trans woman, but as a human being navigating identity, faith, and fear. They didn't skirt the hard things. They talked about violence, about being disowned, about the silence that follows when the world erases your name. And Steve listened, fully, not as a host, but as a man learning in real time what it means to see someone clearly. Then she paused, her eyes locked on the crucifix around Steve's neck, and her voice dropped into something deeper. Steve, she said, can I tell you something I've never said in public? Steve didn't move. He just nodded. I wasn't supposed to be here. Her voice was steady, but the pain in it was loud. There was a night I almost didn't make it. The crowd went silent. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. I had lost everything. My family stopped speaking to me. I couldn't get a job. People would stare. Sometimes worse. I felt like I was walking through the world invisible. She looked down for a second. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. I had $4 to my name, and I remember sitting on a park bench just done. Steve didn't speak, just listened. I was ready to go. I was praying, if God was real, to show me one thing, one sign that I mattered, just one. Her voice broke slightly. And then I heard your voice. The crowd remained completely still. Steve's eyes widened slightly. I was scrolling on my phone, trying not to feel, just numbing out, and I came across this clip. You were on stage. You were talking about storms and about how God doesn't waste pain. Steve's lips parted, but no words came out. You said something that night, Steve. You said, if you're still breathing, it means God's not finished with you yet. Her voice cracked. I watched that clip 3 times, and that night I didn't give up. The next morning, I got out of bed. That's all I could do. But I did it. Steve's hand found the cross around his neck again. But it wasn't a show. It was instinct. It was grounding. You saved me, Steve, and you didn't even know it. Steve wiped at his eyes. The tears were real, not for TV. And when he tried to speak, his voice came out cracked. I was just talking from the heart. I had no idea. She interrupted gently. That's exactly why it saved me. Because you weren't trying to. You were just being real. And sometimes, that's what people need most. The crowd sat in reverence. No clapping. No movement. Just witnessing. Then she leaned in. And I need to tell you something else, she said. Something that might change your life, the way you changed mine. Steve looked up slowly. I'm not just here because of that clip. I'm here because I believe you're more than just a host. She looked at him, tears in her own eyes now. You're a minister in disguise. Steve blinked, his hands now fully gripping the crucifix. And I remember every word you said that night. I've carried them with me, through every rejection, every sleepless night. Every time I was called a slur, I remembered what you said. Then she repeated it, word for word. God doesn't always call the qualified. He qualifies the called. Steve inhaled deeply. That phrase was from a moment in his life when he too was in pain. When he recorded something after a show with no script, just soul. And I realized, Steve, she continued, you weren't just entertaining. You were testifying. Through your comedy, through your pain, through your survival. Steve looked overwhelmed. He opened his mouth, but nothing came. You thought you were just making people laugh, she whispered, but you were carrying light. You were lifting people like me. And then came the sentence that would undo him. You're a minister, Steve. You just happen to wear a suit instead of a collar. Steve dropped his head. A sound escaped him, part laugh, part sob. The audience stayed silent. Not because they were told to, but because the moment felt sacred. And then softly she said, the way you carry that crucifix, Steve, it's not just a symbol, it's a signal. And tonight, I think it's pointing at something bigger than both of us. Steve raised his head, tears falling freely now, and with a trembling voice he whispered, Why me? She smiled, not as someone who had all the answers, but as someone who had walked through the fire and lived to tell it. Because God chooses the unlikely, she said. The ones who bled quietly behind closed doors. The ones who still chose to love, even when the world gave them no reason to. Steve stood slowly. His body shook, not with fear, but with something sacred. He walked over, and they embraced. Not as host and guest, but as survivor and survivor, as soul and soul. The audience stood slowly, tears in their eyes, not clapping, not cheering, just feeling, Steve looked at her and said, This is the greatest gift I've ever received on this stage." And with sincerity, through the tears, he added, "Let's pray." And in that studio, in front of millions, a trans woman and a talk show host became something more. Messengers of grace. Proof that faith doesn't care about your past, only your yes. And for a moment, the world believed again.